When you think of Sega, it's usually blue skies, brightly coloured mascots and the raw arcade thrill of racing through these vistas in a sports car, a fighter jet or as some sort of superhero. Even games like the gritty Streets of Rage 2 are a kaleidoscope of colour. But in 1997, Sega grabbed its shovel and unearthed the shambling corpse of the zombie genre, dragging the monsters and cadavers of the horror world into a light gun game, bringing terror to arcades around the globe. This is Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys with Sega's greatest trilogies, this time featuring The House of the Dead. Like so many of Sega's trilogies which ended up with more than 3 entries, The House of the Dead has 5 arcade releases in the core series, as well as numerous spin-offs. As such, people may feel that the trilogy marker seems somewhat arbitrary, but I can assure you that certainly isn't the case, since the House of the Dead series has a clear beginning, middle and end that is epitomised by the first 3 games. It all starts with a house.
The House of the Dead.
The first entry to the House of the Dead series began development in late 1995, with developers AM1 envisioning a light gun game for an adult audience, built on the Virtua Cop engine. Coming several months after Capcom's Resident Evil, both games were seen as breathing new life into the zombie genre. Inspired by George A. Romero's classic zombie flicks, they brought the horror theme into gaming via very similar premises, i.e. experiments gone wrong in a spooky mansion that hides a laboratory within, with the story told through schlocky B-movie dialogue. The similarities between the two games might suggest some Resi influence on the House of the Dead series, while the development timelines actually suggest otherwise, with Sega's game starting development prior to Resident Evil's launch. Either way, after Resident Evil brought tank-controlled tension to consoles in 1996, The House of the Dead brought horror and gore to the arcades in 1997. The House of the Dead stood out for many reasons. The stunning Model 2 powered graphics, the branching paths, often driven by saving scientists, and of course the zombie dismemberment. I remember a friend excitedly telling me about this brand new Sega arcade game which was the best thing he'd ever seen, simply because you could blast zombies to bits. When the game begins, you're thrust into the shoes of Thomas Rogan as player 1 and his partner G as player 2. In the intro, Rogan's girlfriend Sophie leaves a chilling message on his answering machine, asking for help because everybody's getting killed. And sure enough, on arrival, you're confronted by zombies munching on scientists and all sort of rampaging monsters. You quickly encounter Sophie by the fountain in the courtyard, only for her to be snatched away. Rogan and G attempt to rescue, only for her to seemingly be killed by the first boss, the Chariot. You then make your way through the mansion, battling assorted creatures and taking down the flying beast that snatched Sophie. Along the way, you'll rescue scientists who reward you with extra health, blast more and more elaborate monsters, until eventually making your way to the lab to battle the evil Dr. Curien himself and stop his plans once and for all. The game was an enormous success. Not only was it a visual spectacle, but the soundtrack, in all of its techno grindhouse organ-laden glory, was the perfect accompaniment to the action. The visceral thrill of simply pointing a gun at the screen and blasting these zombies to pieces was the real draw though, with the allure of doing so with the excellent Sega light gun, delivering a light gun experience like no other. The only ports of the original game came to the Sega Saturn and the PC, which both exhibited a number of issues. While the PC version, which I've got to note I couldn't get running on my own desktop, runs at a more consistent frame rate and displays the visuals at a higher resolution, because it uses the Saturn game as the base, it does share a lot of that game's visual flaws, though it does remove the in-game loading. More importantly though, it lacks native light gun support. On the Sega Saturn though, unfortunately the game looks horrendous, with awful texture work in places, a 30 frames per second cap that often sees drops and mid-level loading. But oh, it plays so brilliantly with the Saturn light gun. In fact, it plays so well, I enjoyed beating this specific port of the game more than any other game that you see in this video. While the ports didn't find the same success as the arcade, The House of the Dead still became a legendary title for Sega, as word of mouth spread over this iconic horror-themed light gun experience. To take the series to the next level though, Sega looked to marry that arcade success with a like-for-like release in the home.
The House of the Dead.
At the new Challenge conference, Sega announced not only the new Sega Dreamcast console, but its arcade equivalent, the Naomi board. This was the arcade board built to supersede the Sega Model 3, while also making arcade-perfect ports to the Sega Dreamcast much easier. One of the first games showcased was the astounding looking The House of the Dead 2. Released in arcades in November 1998, it took the mansion's monsters and unleashed them on a Venice-inspired city. Again, there's parallels with Resident Evil 2 here, in moving from the haunted house to the city streets. Not only were the visuals more detailed, but everything had been dialed up. Monster dismemberment had been increased, as is the variety of enemy creatures, though some of the enemy types from the first game do make a return. There's also a very distinctive art style at play that leans into the horror theme, whilst maintaining the colour contrast of the original game to a degree. It was an outstanding looking game for the time, even if it looks a little crude now. Set pieces are much more common as you fight across the city, battling bosses on bridges, blasting zombies off of out of control cars and riding speedboats through the city's canals. There's an abundance of alternate paths and it will take several playthroughs to see absolutely everything in the game's huge arcade mode. While the music is great with the organ-laden jazz horror fusion of the first game present, and featuring some remixes of the original tunes for continuity, it's the script and voice acting that is so comically bad, even worse than the first game, that it makes Resident Evil's B-movie sensibility seemingly Oscar-worthy by comparison. Still, that doesn't detract from one of the greatest arcade light gun experiences ever made. In the arcade, or with the original Dreamcast gun, The House of the Dead 2 plays near perfectly and is peerless in its execution. Unlike the first game that took over a year to come home, and then was a visual shadow of its former self when it did, The House of the Dead 2 landed on the Dreamcast as early as March 1999 in Japan, which was when I got my copy along with my imported Dreamcast console, and then it was pretty much arcade perfect out of the box. Not only that, but it offered a plethora of extra content and modes to keep players coming back. The game also came to the PC and then the Xbox later on as an unlockable in The House of the Dead 3, before coming to the Nintendo Wii some years later. It's the Wii version of the game that you've been watching here, purely because it's the easiest way to play these games with a degree of light gun control on a HD screen. However you play The House of the Dead 2, it is a classic that, whilst lacking some of the atmosphere of the first game, still stands as one of the greatest in its genre. The story of The House of the Dead 2 ends with a showdown with Dr. Curian's mysterious benefactor, Goldman. Once he, his creation and his plans to dominate mankind are laid to rest, it would seem that the tales of The House of the Dead were finally over. But of course, evil never sleeps.
Farewell, friends.
The House of the Dead 3.
By 2002, Sega had said goodbye to its console business and moved on from its Dreamcast-based Naomi board. Like other arcade titles, Sega used the Microsoft Xbox-based Chihiro board to power the third game in the series, The House of the Dead 3. This would be a major departure from the first two games, not only in terms of platforms and art style, but also with regards to gameplay. While the cel-shaded visuals were eventually dropped for a look similar to the first two games, most of the gameplay changes remain. The biggest change of course is to your weapon, with the handguns of the first game exchanged for shotguns. In the arcade, this produces an epic feeling experience as you cock that pump action shotty to reload. This is somewhat lost on the console versions, which largely use traditional light guns if they use any at all. It also causes additional delay when you're reloading to accommodate the reload animation, which can frustrate in intense scenes, requiring a different approach in terms of picking your shots. There's no scientist to save here either, instead you have short scenes where you have to save your partner. Bosses work differently too, with a stun meter that needs to be quickly depleted to inflict damage. Finally, the route choices are far more constrained, with them not being as dynamic and based on the player fulfilling certain gameplay conditions. Rather, you simply choose your paths when prompted. It does allow you to play the 3 middle stages in any order, similar to the Virtua Cop games, but it is a significant departure from the first 2 House of the Dead games. Still, once you acclimatise to the rhythm of the shotgun play, the House of the Dead 3 remains a thrilling experience, and an addictive one at that, as you aim to improve your ranks with every play. It also brings the series to a satisfying conclusion, tying together the story and events set in motion by the first game. The 2 main characters are G, who appeared in the previous games, and Lisa Rogan, the daughter of Thomas Rogan, who also appears in the game, and they battle together to finally put a stop to Dr. Curion's legacy. And yes, there have been games since, namely the House of the Dead 4 and Scarlet Dawn, but they actually both take place before the House of the Dead 3, and work more as side stories to the second game, rather than continuing the saga itself. They also dial down the zombie dismemberment in favour of having more hordes of zombies on screen, so really they are quite a departure from the core House of the Dead trilogy. Which is why the House of the Dead trilogy works with the original 3 light gun games. The first 2 in their arcade forms are as close to light gun perfection as you can get, whilst the third game freshens up the formula to bring the story to a satisfying conclusion. Sadly, the first game isn't easily playable outside of the disappointing remake and emulation, which can at times show visual glitches. But the Saturn port, as long as you have the Sega light gun and a CRT, replicates the arcade experience extremely well, despite the visual downgrade. However, the Wii versions of entries 2 and 3 are highly recommended, perfect for the Halloween season, or any time of year. And if you do have a CRT and the required light guns, the Dreamcast version of the House of the Dead 2 and the Xbox port of 3 are even better. But that's all for this episode of Sega's Greatest Trilogies. This has been Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys, and we will see you on the Sega side.